morning and welcome to the Resilience Matters series. Today we are delighted to be joined by Louise Teboul. Louise is a UK Partnerships Director at Common Purpose, and she's also an experienced leadership facilitator who works with emerging, senior and international leaders. I know, Louise, you're really passionate and you specialise in leading with cultural intelligence and inclusive leadership. So we are so delighted to have you on the call today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks, Kathleen. Lovely to see you again, Alison.
Absolutely.
So let's start. Let's tell us a bit about yourself, Louise, and your experience in building your resilience.
Yeah, so I've probably had one of those careers that's not your typical career. I've done all sorts of things. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do when I left school. So I quite often say I disappointed my mother by not going to university, and I disappointed my dad by not going into his small business. And I kind of fell into construction, and then I got made redundant, and then I went into kind of leisure and hotels and got made redundant again. And then I went into kind of marketing and worked in the oil industry for a while, and then PR and communications. And then I came to Common Purpose, which I think is I think I'm really lucky that I do a job that I love. But I think some of those early experiences of being made redundant unexpectedly and going through some tough things earlier on in my career, and also having to move sectors and jobs and things, really, if I look back on it, and it's not something that you tend to do very often until you have a conversation like this, has really helped support my resilience, because I think, I've always picked myself up after a knockback and just dusted myself off and gone again. And I think I've been very lucky that people have given me opportunities, which is actually something I'm very passionate about, is making sure that I give opportunities to other people. And, even if they don't seem like the right fit for a role, or, if somebody wants some advice, I always advise kind of emerging and young leaders to reach out to people and just sort of ask if they can pick their brains and things, because I think it's really good to build your kind of connections as you go through your career. I think that's actually a really important thing for your own resilience, is to have people that you can kind of talk to and call on if things aren't going great. So yes, and that's a very quick snapshot of a very long career.
Yeah, and like you say, that's hard, particularly at the moment, people losing their jobs and things. Is it being around people that kind of kept your resilience going and looking for those, finding those opportunities? Would you say that was?
Yes, I'm quite a kind of tenacious person, and I'm quite action orientated. So I'm kind of a bit, I think I'm a bit of a paradox, but I'm probably like a lot of people. I'm naturally kind of, I have a tendency to worry and to overthink things. But how I've learned to combat that is I move to action. So I'm someone that does things about things. So if something happens and goes wrong, I really force myself to kind of get up and out and go and do something about it, rather than sort of sitting back and just overthinking it, because that takes me to a kind of pretty, gloomy place. So I think I've always been someone that's used their initiative, and maybe that early experience of not going to university and getting on a graduate track or whatever I could have done made me a little bit more kind of entrepreneurial or kind of use my initiative. So, I would kind of, force myself to kind of go and knock on, office doors and say, have you got any vacancies? And this is a long, long time ago when I didn't have a job, and try things that I would never have necessarily thought that were for me, but actually I could see. I think one thing I was good at was seeing where I've got skills that are transferable. So, for example, I went to be a head receptionist in a hotel, and I'd never worked in hotels before, but my family had, and I knew that I'd worked in property and had been public facing. So I just turned up and went, well, I've worked with public in a different setting. It's kind of the same sort of thing, and just blagged it a little bit and got given an opportunity. So I think. That tendency to kind of think about what are the actions that I can personally take to help, what can I control? And it's that classic thing, isn't it? I can't control what's going on, in the economy or, sadly, some of the things going on in the world, but I can control about what I can personally do, and I can take action. And that's always made me feel better if I've kind of been, in a difficult place, thinking about what can I do, whether it's reaching out to other people and having a conversation, or whether it's doing something sort of that's going to change my own physical state and mental state. I've always done that. And I'm not really sure where that came from. I think it's, maybe it's just a natural thing that I learned fairly early on that, I needed to be able to do to kind of pick myself up and dust myself off.
Yeah. And like you say,
I think I think it's really interesting. You're also talking about that whole thing about like identifying that you've got these transferable skills that can move from place to place, because quite often when we talk about resilience, and when we work with people on resilience, we get the first thing we have to do is get them to stop and see what they've already got in their toolkit, never mind what else we want to put. But people will often take that time to stop and reflect and go, well, I've got this and I can do that. Just simple things about making your top 10 list. Sorry, the dog's in the background. Those simple things of recognizing I've got this. Where else can I use that? Particularly in a changing world, identifying what you've got and recognizing that, they are transferable across different sectors, different roles, etc. It's such an important thing.
Yeah, I think you're right, Alison. And I think, I almost probably did it a little bit by accident, but having worked in, PR and comms and the oil industry, all these different places. And I remember being in PR and I was working on technology and, working for brands like the post office. And I remember saying, I want to do financial services, and people going, oh, but you're not a financial services expert. And I went, but I'm a comms expert. It's, it's the same, it's just a different audience. And I think maybe having moved around to different places kind of makes you more more reflective on those things and gives you a little bit more confidence about that. So actually, when other people have sort of said to me, aren't you taking a risk leaving the private sector to come to Common Purpose, which is a not-for-profit? I was like, well, what's the worst that can happen? If it doesn't work out, I'll leave in a year and I'll go and do something else. And I think, people might look at my CV and think, crikey, she's done all these different things. And I think now they see it as a benefit. I think when I was younger, though, I could go to talk to people sometimes and they go, why have you jumped around? And I'd be really honest. I got made redundant. I can't, there's nothing I can do about that. I can just move on to the next thing. So I do think it is an important thing. I think quite often we look at ourselves and we see our, I know I'm really bad at this. We see our weaknesses and what we didn't do well. And actually, it's really important to recognize what we do well. And actually, other people can be really good at helping us see that sometimes when we don't. So I sometimes do this thing on our leadership programs where I say, ask a group of people that you know for 3 words to describe you, like people that are your colleagues, friends, family. And it can give you this really great pen portrait about what other people see in you. And sometimes we don't see those really positive qualities in ourselves. So I think it's one thing people can try, and lots of people try it and they come back and I say, how did you get on? They go, I was so pleased, and then I heard things I wasn't expecting to, because we can be our own harshest critics. I think that is, and I think that can be a big thing about resilience, is trying to stop that voice in your head that sometimes is quite critical.
And like you say, especially in something where you haven't got control, like redundancy, where it can affect your confidence, actually reminding yourself of all those great things that you can do and how lucky somebody else would be to get you. It's just flipping that mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's really important. Yes. Yeah.
And so you mentioned Common Purpose. So tell us a little bit about what Common Purpose does.
Yeah, so Common Purpose, we're a leadership organisation. We bring leaders together from public, private and not-for-profit sector. And the organisation's been going over 30 years. I have been around a long time. In fact, Alison did one of my first ever programs. I'm sure I had no idea what I was doing then, but
2006 that was.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and it's all about real life leadership. So, it's about bringing a group of people together who can learn from and with each other, and having leaders come in and tell their stories. real stories, warts and all, things we've learned, things we still get wrong. And I think it's a real privilege talking to the people that we get to talk to, which is why I'm still around. And actually, a lot of the things that we talk about on the program are relevant for resilience. So we do things like learning groups where people bring their own challenges, and I think that really plays on that idea of having someone outside of your world that you can go to as a sounding board to sense check things when you're struggling, or when there's something happened and you're thinking, is it just me? I think that can be really important. But I think we also have lots of really honest conversations, whether it's emerging or senior leaders. I've been speaking to someone this morning who works for the UN Refugee Council, and even on that conversation we touched on imposter syndrome and leading change, and feeling like you might have to have all the answers as a senior person, but really we all know we don't need to. So I think a lot of what we do is really kind of helping give people the skills and the tools, but also giving them a context on their own leadership, and self-care and resilience, looking after yourself so you can support others, has become so much more important and talked about in the last 4 or 5 years, as you might imagine, given what so many of us have been through before. Because I remember when we were running our program in Birmingham the week before lockdown for COVID, and then we carried on doing things virtually, and people were saying it was so great to have a group of people at a senior level that they could talk to who were going through similar challenges, and none of us knew the answers, none of us knew how long lockdown was going on for. So that idea of having a group of people that you can kind of confide in has been really useful, and people stay in touch with people for years after the program because they've built that trust and relationship with people. So yes, but I could say so much more, but yeah, that gives you a flavor, I hope.
Can I throw in one thing there, just linking into actually to our thinking habits, that I think common purpose just totally matches. And it's around, common purpose helps you to get that broader perspective on things, to look around. And we have, we have being open and generous to others, and we also have being positive and optimistic. And in both cases, it's about, we'll say to people, get different perspectives, look at the world differently, because you will learn so much from it. And I'm a learning group facilitator, and I learn so much from it. Every time we do one of those sessions, I get something, and you watch everybody else's faces, and they look at the challenge that somebody else is facing in a totally different industry, and they go, but these are the commonalities. But that's a different approach. Maybe I could try that. And it's a wonderful thing, bringing in such a diverse group of people, both, within a single country, but now with the virtual world, you bring in people from all over the world together. And it's just such a brilliant way of helping people see possibility and opportunity and ways forward. I just think it's a wonderful organization.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you for your support. And it's interesting, but you're right. And I think sometimes we can get so in our head and in our bubble and in the minutiae of our own challenges, and everybody's challenges are important and they're ours. But I always remember there was somebody who used to work in financial services, an emerging leader, and every time I ever met him, he talked about how busy he was. Like, this was his mantra: I'm so busy, I'm so overwhelmed, I've got and to be honest, personally, and this is an interesting dynamic about us as facilitators, I was thinking, well, it's not going to get any easier the more senior you get, because you don't suddenly lose all these things, you just learn to manage them better. And I was thinking, kind of, there's a context here, but you can't tell people, sometimes you can't tell people things, they need to experience them. And I always remember him coming on a session, and I can't even remember what it was or who he spoke to, and at the end of it he said, I've had an aha moment. And I said, oh, what's that? And he said, I've been really overstressing about the busyness and this, that, and the other, and I've just talked to someone who is managing this, as I said, I don't even remember what it was, but it's just given my challenge and my worry a completely different context. And I think it's quite hard, because you don't ever want to belittle whatever any individual's challenge or worry is, but discovering someone else's context for yourself can really, I think you're right, Alison, help reframe it a little bit. And you know, I think I was lucky enough when I was in the oil industry to kind of lucky enough for the experience to work in crisis and issues. Thank goodness we didn't have to deal with that many. But when you were in those situations, that was a real kind of potential life and death situation if something happened to a refinery. And I think again, if I'm getting anxious and stressed about things, and you know, somebody hasn't answered my email or somebody's pulled out of a session or whatever, I just kind of I give myself a bit of a reality check and think, well, you know, at the end of the day, it's not life and death. It's important to me in the moment, and it's important for what we're trying to achieve. But in the big picture, you know, it's not that important. So I think if you can find ways to just sort of give yourself that sense check, it can be really helpful.
Yeah, that perspective is a really good one, and I think we're all guilty of being driven by our to-do lists. And actually, you're right, no one's going to die. You know, this is an expectation we've set on ourselves, which is some of it. But what I was interested in, because I think it's amazing, it sounds like amazing, and I completely agree, you know, with the whole collaborative approach and getting new perspectives and, you know, being around people you heard in your tribe. But how do you create that space where people will open up?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, we have a sort of set of conventions that we get everybody to sign up to at the beginning, and you know, there are things like not giving or taking offence, being open and open-minded, being engaged and positive, being a leader, and then Chatham House rule of confidentiality. So we work really, really hard at that at the beginning to set the context. And we kind of talk about this common purpose microclimate. It's kind of creating this space where people can come and kind of learn from and with each other. But then I think there's some other things that we do that really help right at the beginning. And one of them that I love is we get people to bring an object to introduce themselves. So we say, bring something that says something about you that isn't about your job or your role. And actually that kind of really helps people connect as individuals and human beings, rather than I'm a partner of a law firm or I'm a senior police officer or whatever. So I think so many of the things that we do during the program will really help people start to think, you know, holistically about themselves as an individual and a leader, rather than just this is my work. And I think we work, you know, we get people to kind of come and meet before the session starts and go into kind of little breakout rooms and have coffee and chat to each other. And you know, interestingly, one thing I started doing during lockdown, but I've tried to continue, is I just do a kind of check-in with people at the start of any program module, because we're still virtual. You know, how are you doing today? And literally, you don't have to be positive, you don't have to justify it, you don't have to explain. And you kind of get a sense of what's going on for people in their lives. And I think people, it's not a normal thing that you, I know some people do it, but it's not a normal thing you do in meetings. So people kind of get a sense of, oh, I can just come here and be myself. And, you know, the fact that I've had an issue dropping the kids off, or the fact that, you know, I'm overwhelmed with so much going on, I can say that, park it and move on. So I think there's lots of tips, but, you know, we kind of, it's very much about participation and bringing yourself and sharing your own experiences. So it's kind of self-directed learning. So it kind of only works if you're open to it.
Yeah,
I think.
And that's, yeah, with a lot of these things, you get in what you put out, right? And and that's why I was really interested, because we do have this persona potentially at work, which is slightly different to, you know, a bit like you say, how you doing? Oh yeah, I'm great. Thinking, oh my god, I've had another one. You know, and how you get people to really be.
And I think the other thing is we role model it, and all of our contributors role model it. So, you know, we'll have really kind of senior people coming and talking and being really open and honest. And because it's kind of confidential, people feel they can open up about things. And I think that's another thing about resilience. When you hear other senior people saying, well, I still have moments of imposter syndrome or doubt, or I still struggle with this, you kind of think, oh, okay, it's not just me, that's normal. It isn't that you suddenly arrive and you've got it all figured out. And we had an event on a face-to-face event on Tuesday night, which is the first time we've got people together, our alumni. And we had a couple of guests, and the first thing one of them said to me, the genuine kind of openness and warmth, which I thought was a lovely thing to say in the room, and actually people just wanting to be here and meet and talk to people. We do work really hard to kind of make that happen. And I think the other thing is I'm also really honest and understand that some people will get that straight away and they'll feel totally fine with it and comfortable. For other people, this will feel quite different to them, and it will take them a while to warm up to it and to feel that they can fully be themselves. And that's completely fine too. I came from a place, I always sort of talk about when I was in the oil industry, of thinking this is me at work and this is me outside of work and the two will never meet. And I was very kind of, I think I have to be this way for the job, which I didn't. That was pressure I put on myself. So I kind of also know that for some people, we talk about openness and empathy. This level of openness will be out of their comfort zone, and it will take them a while to warm up to it. But when they start to see the benefits of the kind of authenticity and the honesty, it becomes easier. And also, you know, there's no agendas. Everybody's there to learn from and with each other. So it can actually make it easier to share some of that stuff, I think, in this neutral space rather than with your own peers in your organization, possibly.
And how does that translate? So I'm just thinking, if a leader is listening to this now, thinking this all sounds great, you can see how that's a safe space outside of your own working environment. How can they create that space in their own unit and teams?
Well, I think that's one of the things. Funny enough, I've just come off a call with a participant who missed a module that we did the other week, and what we're doing with any individuals is thinking about, you know, you're learning and reflecting for yourself, but then you're thinking about, I always ask the so what questions. So what am I going to take away from this, for me personally and my team and my organization? So the programs work on 3 levels. They work on the individual, the organization, and then potentially community, society, whatever it is that you are interested in. So we don't say, if you come on a common purpose course, you've got to go and do something about, I don't know, addressing homelessness or, you know, inequality or the environment. We just sort of say, we're going to help give you the tools to cross boundaries and to collaborate and to learn about yourself, so you can work better with people that are different to you. What you then do with that will depend on your context and your organization. So we were talking about actively seeking feedback last week, and quite a few of the people on the module were sort of saying, I really like this idea and this concept, so I'm going to go away and do a session with my team on it next week. So it isn't that it just stays with the individual. We don't want it to be kind of exclusive. We want you to go and share it, because it's all about, you know, leading people and sort of supporting teams.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, you know, as leader then, and linking it kind of back to resilience, you know, what would be your kind of top tips for building that resilience, or from your own experience?
I think there's a few things that I've learned over the years. One is to become self-aware about your own kind of warning or trigger signs. So before you get overwhelmed or burnt out, try and notice when you're getting towards that stage, so you can do something about it yourself. So mine, I know, is if I start to lose my sense of humor, and if, you know, I use humor a lot, it's kind of like part of, you know, who I am. If I'm in meetings and I'm kind of not seeing the funny side of things anymore, and I can't bring any light to the sessions, that for me is a real session. I'm starting to get overloaded. So I kind of, that's one of my top tips, is kind of know what your stresses are. Another one would be find your thing to change your state. And some people, I mean, so many people over the years have tried to get me into running. Running is not my thing. Interestingly, I sometimes ask this question on our programs, and I say, what brings you joy? What is it that brings you joy, just for you, for yourself, and I quite often find that if I ask that question, we reflect that we don't do enough of it. And for mine, it's dancing. So I know I can, it sounds like a weird thing, I know I can change my state. If I'm having a bad day, I can put on something like Bruno Mars' Uptown Funk.
Oh,
dance
yeah.
for 5 minutes and I've completely changed my state, my physical
Mm-hmm.
state. It's just shaken me out of things.
Mm.
You know, for some people it'll be listening to music, for some people it'll be, you know, walking the dog, for some people it'll be meditation. I think nearly every single session we've ever done with anybody who has got to a certain stage in their career, and we've asked about resilience or how do you look after yourself, self-care, they've nearly all said, I have this thing that I do for me. So finding your thing. And then, and I probably could go on, but the other one that I think has been a really important one for me is setting my own boundaries. So I'm a bit of a people pleaser. I feel guilty if I say no to people, but I've become much better at kind of being open and honest. And it's interesting because some people say you should just say no to things and you don't have to give a reason. I actually feel better if I'm really honest with people and say, I can't do this right now because this is my focus for the next few months. So at the moment, I've got a new role where I've taken over an international program and I'm having to do less locally. And I've found that being honest with people and saying, I'm really sorry, it's not that I don't want to support you, but I've now got to spend more of my time. People are just like, okay, that's fine. You know, and I think setting your own, and I think that comes in lots of forms. One thing I was good at and I'm not doing as much, but I need to do is putting a walk break in my calendar, because otherwise people just fill it with meetings. So I'm literally back to back on Zoom calls or Teams calls. So there are lots of things that I think we can take ownership for and do that nobody's going to bat an eyelid in and about, but sometimes we don't do it. So literally, I started putting in my calendar every day, you know, 45-minute walk break. Nobody ever said to me, can I put a meeting in? They just thought, oh, she can't do it then. So I think setting boundaries can be really important, especially if you are a people pleaser. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. It's not just setting the boundaries, but it's also how you are very honestly communicating those boundaries, because that's not easy. There are easier paths, but they're not as honest and they're not as open. So you're choosing, you're choosing a way of doing it. That have you ever had sort of people who are a bit like, oh, because you are being so honest with them and they're just not used to it?
No, I don't think so. And I think that's a really good point, Alison. I think because over the years I've tried to sort of become more of my authentic self, you know. And I think also because my job is quite outward facing, so people see me on LinkedIn and Twitter all the time. So there's no point me pretending, you know, that I'm not out and about doing things. It's better for me to sort of say, I am out and about doing things, but this has to be my emphasis now. And I think people respect you for it. I think actually, you know, it's probably me that goes away and thinks, oh gosh, I hope that was okay. I feel like I've let people down. And I suppose the other thing I'd say is if I ask people to do things and they can't do it, I'd much rather they said no, or I can't do it because, rather than just never answering the email or never coming back to me. So I think for me, it feels like a respectful thing to do. And the other thing I do as well, which I should have said, is if I can't do something, which sometimes I can't, I will quite often say, but I know someone that can help.
Yeah.
So, because that's really nice, because then you're kind of giving the opportunity to someone else. You don't feel like you're letting people down. But I think that honesty, it's something that I've practiced and that becomes easier with time. So it's like a lot of these things. I think you kind of almost have to practice them and to sort of make them habits. And then sometimes you fall off the wagon. It's like, I'm just realizing that, you know, I haven't put the walk breaks in my diary, and I'm really feeling that actually now, because I'll sit here for however many hours. So I need to go and do that again. So I think it's about taking a bit of ownership as well about our own self-care is important.
So many things to think about.
I know. And you know what? I could totally relate to that last point. The amount of times I say yes, and I'm like, Kathy, how are you going to fit that in? Why did you say yes? Totally a people pleaser. So, very relatable and very useful. Thank you, Louise. I can't believe the half an hour is gone, and there's so much more we could talk about. But thank you so much for your insight. It's been so interesting, and sounds like you did some really great work in Common Purpose. So well done for that.
Thank you.
So if anybody wants to find out more information, please do look at our website, where we've got lots of free resources on resilience. We've got 101 ways to build mental strength, so there'll be something there for everybody. As I say, lots of blogs, lots of materials, psychometrics, bits and pieces, all free. Please go in and have a look. And thank you, Louise, and we will see you all next time.
Thanks, Louise.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.